Main Place Real Estate is here today sponsoring our segment, and joining me right now are Aaron Warner and Chris Harrison. Welcome back to CI Living.
Thank you. Good to be here.
All right, so I see you've brought coffee, and we're going to talk about real estate. So how are these two things connected?
Yeah, we actually brought some coffee from the river in Decatur, Illinois, downtown. They roasted this Burundi coffee, and just like brewing coffee is a process, so is buying a home. So we thought we'd tie the two together and talk about buying a home today.
All right, I love that. So what is the first step if you're buying a home?
Well, there's really a lot of ingredients into buying a home. Just like a cup of coffee, you've got to have the coffee roasted just right, which the River Coffee Company in downtown Decatur does a phenomenal job at that. Getting the water temperature just right, getting the pour speed just right for this pour over coffee that he's doing. So a lot of things that buyers are looking at right now is, what's their credit like? How much money do they have for a down payment? What's their budget like? What sort of payment can they afford in a home? And these are just conversations that we want people to be having. And what we think is important is that they're having these with family. A lot of times parents and grandparents are involved in these conversations about, is this the right time for these young kids, so to speak, to buy their first home? And we think for a lot of reasons now is a good time to buy a home.
And I know a lot of the conversation right now is around interest rates. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Interest rates have been historically high. Recently historically high. You know, if you look last 10, 15 years, yeah, they're really high compared to where they've been. But really, if you go back 30, 40 years, the fact that you can still get an interest rate and you can borrow money to buy a home around 6% or even 6.5%, that's a really good interest rate. And with predictions for values to continue to increase, we think it's a good time for buyers to lock in those purchase price on values right now and still at a good interest rate.
And I think that that's a really good point that you make, which is like interest rates, but versus the price of homes right now because of the historically low inventory.
Correct. Yes, inventory is going to stay tight, and there's a whole new generation of buyers coming into the market, and there just hasn't been enough inventory to meet the demand that's there. So that's why we have these prices that have gone up, and they're going to continue to go up.
All right, so back to you, Aaron, tying it back to the coffee. So what has been transpiring here while he's been telling us about the market?
Yeah, so we just got the water to the right temperature. We've been pouring it over. Again, it's all about the process of putting the water over at a pace that it can absorb all the flavors from the coffee. And just like Chris was talking about, like the market right now isn't a great time for people to be able to purchase a home because, as Chris said, prices are only going to go up. So waiting longer is not necessarily the key here.
And I think that that's really important, like with the absorption of the coffee. I think buying a home is a really good investment because then every month that money that you're putting towards something is actually going toward your own equity in that home as opposed to putting money to rent. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Correct. It truly is the best and the most fundamental wealth building 101 is to own your home and don't pay rent. And with those values increasing, rents are going to increase too. So we think it is an important time for people to get in homes when they can. I did a video last week about buying the ugly house on the block. Now's the time to buy the ugly house and make improvements to it and fix it up and let it come up in value with all the other homes around it. But like making the coffee, things take time. It takes absorption.
Right.
This is a process. This is an education process too for first-time buyers that have parents and grandparents that are helping them, but also chirping in their ear going, I would never pay that much.
Right.
You know, times are a little different from when you bought your first house.
Right.
But we believe, and especially our team does, we're really educational with our clients. We know this takes time. We know there's a lot of questions that buyers are going to have. It's quite a process. And in the end, we come out with a great result, and that's getting people into their home.
And I feel like the rules have changed, much like with coffee, right? It used to be this. Now it's fancy macchiatos and foam and cream and all that stuff. I feel like that's a really good point that you made about the ugly house on the block, because I remember growing up when we would house hunt with my parents, it was like, don't buy the biggest home, don't buy the smallest home. But nowadays, if you buy the smallest home, but then put some fancy creamers,
put some whipped cream on it,
then all of a sudden you have that sweat equity in it as well, and then you've made improvements, which just adds to the value of your home.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just like I will say too, though, honestly, like coffee, stay at the coffee. You know, it's the whipped creams and the creamers and all the fancy stuff and sprinkles and that. Be careful, honestly, with information you get online.
Okay.
There's so much information online. There's great information online, but when you really want to talk with somebody, talk to somebody local.
Right.
Like, find an agent that's your neighbor, or you go to church with them, or somebody, or your family has worked with them. Find a realtor that you can work with, and find a lender that you can work with. A lender that is here that you can talk to. Most important thing.
That's a really good point as well, because I feel like the market is so different everywhere you go, and so if you're talking to somebody in one state, the rules don't apply. I feel like even if you're talking to an agent in Chicago versus an agent in...
Completely different.
Yeah, exactly.
Completely different. So my analogy with the sprinkles and the whipped cream is all those flashy TV ads and Super Bowl ads that you're seeing.
Right.
That's the meaningless creamer that you don't really need.
That you don't actually
Get a
need.
Local lender and a local agent.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for being here and for sharing this delicious coffee analogy with us.
There
now
you go.
I have something to drink. And if you want more information, you can visit us on the web after the show at CILiving.tv. And we thank Main Place Real Estate for sponsoring our segment.